The twin suns burned over the red skies of Keltera, casting long shadows over the arena of blood and honor. The crowd roared like wild beasts. Eager for blood, eager for a show, flags of noble houses waved in the wind. And high above the fighting pit sat Princess Valera. Her golden armor shining, she was tall, proud, and fierce, with cold violet eyes and a crown of bone forged from old warriors she had defeated. Beside her stood her champion, a monstrous alien brute named Kaval, a beast twice the size of any normal fighter, his forearms flexed as he cracked his knuckles, ready to destroy his next opponent. Valera did not smile. Victory was expected. She turned her gaze to the far gate, where a single figure stood alone, calm and silent. It was a human, small, unimpressive, and without armor, just a long, dark coat and a strange blade at his side. The crowd went quiet in confusion, then burst into laughter. A human against Kaval? Someone shouted, "What insult is this?" Others jeered, but Valera narrowed her eyes, sensing something different. The human's name was Rihanna, commander of a forgotten Earth expedition, stranded but fearless. He walked into the arena like it meant nothing, like death was just another stop on the road. Kavalium slammed his fists on the ground, roaring, shaking the sand beneath him. But Ryan didn't flinch. He drew his blade, a strange metal weapon that shimmered like starlight. The bell rang. Kavalium charged, faster than anyone expected. Each of his arms swinging with deadly force. The crowd gasped, then screamed. In one move, one flash of his sword, Ryan stepped past Kaval. The beast froze mid-run. His body trembling, a heartbeat later, blood sprayed the sand. Kaval's body split in half from shoulder to hip, collapsing in a lifeless heap. Silence, no cheers. No screams, just stunned shock. Princess Valera stood up so fast her throne toppled behind her. Her champion, the greatest warrior of her house, was dead in one strike. Killed by a human, all eyes turned to her. The law of conquest was clear. When a champion dies in the arena, the victor claims all of the loser's house, land, title, and even people. Valera's face burned with shame. She was a royal daughter, a noble warrior, but now, by ancient law, she and her maids were the human's property. Guards looked to her for orders, but she said nothing. She couldn't. The law was sacred, it bound even her. Ryan did not raise his arms in victory. He simply stood there, sword in hand, eyes calm, as if nothing had happened. The crowd slowly began to murmur, disbelief turning into awe. The human is her master now, someone whispered. A maid beside Valera trembled, clutching her silk robes. Another cried softly, her voice barely heard over the rising storm of gossip. Valera clenched her fists, her pride screaming inside her. She was Kelteran. Royalty, not some prize to be handed over. And yet, she had seen it with her own eyes. One strike, one clean cut. This was no lucky blow. This human was death with a sword. She took a slow breath and stepped forward. Her voice cold and clear. "Bring him to the throne room," she said. "If the law says I am his, then let him come and claim what he has won." The guards bowed and moved quickly, their faces pale. Ryan stood still until they arrived, then followed silently. The arena behind him was stained with blood, but his boots left no mark. As he disappeared into the halls of the royal fortress, the people of Keltera whispered stories that would be passed down for generations. The day a human split a champion in half. The day a princess fell not to a conqueror's army, but to one man's blade. And as Valera sat back on her throne, trying to calm her racing heart, one thought echoed louder than the cheers or laws. What kind of man had she just lost her freedom to? Princess Valera sat alone in the silent chamber of judgment. No music played, no servants spoke, even the walls seemed ashamed. The throne she once ruled from now felt like a cage, cold and mocking. Her champion was dead, her pride shattered, and by the law of conquest, she was no longer her own. Her people watched her not as a leader, but as property. And now, the human who had broken her world was walking toward her throne room step by step, each footfall echoing louder than the arena's roar. Guards stood, along the sides of the Golden Hall, but they did nothing. They knew the law once a champion falls. The victor owns the house, and the house included the princess. Valera had studied ancient codes all her life, had trained to lead armies and give orders, but no amount of knowledge had prepared her for this moment. For the first time in her life, her fate was not hers to decide. The doors opened slowly, and Ryan walked in, not like a conqueror, but like a stranger in the wrong place. He wasn't dressed like a victor, wore no crown or armor, just his dark coat, dusty boots, and that quiet stare that saw everything but revealed nothing. Valera rose from her throne, tall and proud, hiding the fire behind her eyes. Her 6 maids knelt behind her, dressed in ceremonial silk, their heads lowered in shame and fear. None dared look up at the human, who now, by law, could command them. "You stand in my house," she said coldly, her voice sharp like steel, but by the ancient right. "It is now yours." Ryan paused, looking around the grand chamber, then back at her. "I didn't come here for slaves," he said quietly. "I came here to protect my crew." Valera flinched at his answer, more confused than before. He wasn't angry, wasn't proud, wasn't even pleased. He had killed a monster and won a kingdom, yet acted like he'd lost something. "You killed Cavalium with one strike," she said. "You could have demanded anything, and yet you ask for nothing?" Ryan stepped forward, his eyes not on her body or crown, but on her face. "I ask for peace," he said. "You follow laws that chain people like animals. Maybe it's time someone broke those chains." The maids stirred behind her, whispering to each other in hushed tones. Was this human mad or merciful? Valera wanted to hate him, wanted to call him a fool. But something inside her twisted a strange emotion she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not hate. Something closer to curiosity. This man had power, but no desire to use it, and that made him dangerous in a different way. "You own me now," she said bitterly. "Me and the women behind me. By your law, we are concubines, meant to serve your every need." She stepped forward, chest raised, daring him, testing him. "Will you claim us human? Right here, in front of your guards and mine?" Her voice was filled with poison, but her hands trembled slightly. Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked past her to the center of the chamber and sat on the floor, cross-legged like a monk. "No," he said simply. "I'm tired of taking." That one word struck harder than any sword. Valera blinked, unsure what to do next. "No?" she repeated, her voice almost breaking. "I'm not here to humiliate you," Ryan said, "or to use the law like a weapon. I came here because your people attacked my ship. I had no choice but to fight. I'll leave when my crew is safe, and I'll take no one who doesn't choose to come." Silence filled the hall again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not shame, but disbelief. Valera looked at her maids, who now dared to lift their heads slightly. One of them, a soft-voiced girl named Elia, whispered, "He is kind." Another nodded, tears in her eyes. Valera turned back to Ryan, and for the first time, she truly looked at him, not as an enemy, not as a human, but as a man. He had no crown, no throne, no army. Just quiet strength and a heart she couldn't understand. "Then what will you do with us?" she asked softly. Ryan stood and met her gaze. "I'll let you decide that," he said. "But I won't chain anyone with that." He turned and left the chamber, his footsteps fading into silence. Valera stood frozen, breath caught in her chest. For the first time, the chains of law felt weaker, and the chains in her heart just a little lighter. The moon of Keltera cast a soft glow over the garden walls. Valera sat on the edge of a fountain, her armored boots wet from the misty spray. She hadn't worn ceremonial dresses since that day in the arena. Tonight, she chose leather and steel symbols of the warrior she used to be, but deep inside, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Not a free princess, not a concubine, and not a slave, just uncertain. From the balcony, she watched the human below in the courtyard, and Commander Ryan moved like a shadow, slicing his strange human sword through the air. It was not dance, not battle, something in between. Flowing, quiet, precise, every Night he trained alone. No guards, no audience, no boasting. Just a man trying to stay sharp in a world that wanted to break him. Valera had started watching him by accident. But now, she found herself drawn to him without reason. She told herself it was strategy, learning his habits, studying his weakness, but deep down, she knew it was something else, something slower, warmer, something dangerous. A whisper came from the shadows behind her. Ilya, her youngest maid, stepped forward holding a folded robe. "Princess," she said softly, "he left this for you." Valera frowned and opened it. It was a warm cloak, human made with his insignia. "Why would he give this to me?" she asked. "He said the wind would be colder tonight." Ilya replied, smiling gently. Valera hesitated, then threw it over her shoulders. It was warm and smelled of oil, iron, and earth. Human things, but not unpleasant. He is. "I expected," Ilya said, her voice barely a whisper. "He sleeps on the floor." Valera turned to her with a raised brow. "You've been spying on him?" Ilya looked down, ashamed. "I clean his room," she said. "He keeps to himself, always reading or writing. Never asks for anything." Valera was silent for a moment, then asked the question she had tried to ignore. "Do you trust him?" Ilya didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt beside the fountain and touched the water. "I don't trust men, Princess," she said, "but I believe he sees us not as trophies or property, but as people." That answer struck deep. Valera had faced hundreds of warriors, nobles, beasts, and liars, but never a man like Ryan, quiet, respectful, and terrifying in battle. She didn't know what to do with that kind of strength. It felt like power, but wrapped in silence. Later that night, she left her chambers and walked the dark hallways alone. She found him sitting under a twisted tree in the courtyard, sword resting beside him. He didn't look surprised to see her, only nodded. Once, calm and quiet. "You're not guarding me," she said. "And yet you sleep outside our chambers?" Ryan looked up at the sky, where twin moons drifted behind silver clouds. "I'm not a guard," he said, "but I won't let anyone harm you." Valera tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle. "Not even yourself?" Ryan looked at her, then stood. "I know what this place does to people," he said. "It breaks them in silence. You were proud once, maybe still are, but the law has taken your voice." "I'm not here to give orders," he continued. "I'm here to listen." Valera crossed her arms, but her voice softened. "Then listen now," she said. "Why'd you kill Cavil so easily?" Ryan looked away, and for the first time his face darkened. "I've fought monsters," said. Cavalium was strong but not cruel, but I've seen what cruelty looks like. Out. It wears crowns, commands armies, and hides behind honor. Valera stepped closer, her heart beating faster. He was more than a soldier. He was a survivor, someone who had lost much, but never lost himself, and that made her afraid, not of him, but of what she might become around him the next morning. News arrived, whispers from the outer houses. One noble lord had sent an assassin to kill Ryan in the night, but the blade never reached him. The assassin was found tied to a post at dawn, untouched, unharmed. Valera knew Ryan had done it. Not by killing, but by showing mercy. She stood at her window as the sun rose, watching him train again, and this time she didn't see a human enemy. She saw a sword sharp enough to cut through law, and a heart steady enough to change a broken world. Valera sat at the long war table, now the same table where her ancestors had planned invasions. Now it was covered not in maps, but in silence. Her maids sat beside her, each quiet, uncertain, and across from them stood Ryan, hands behind his back, eyes steady as stone. He had not raised his voice, not given commands. He had simply spoken a truth that shattered every rule she knew. "You are not mine," he had said. "You never were." The words had echoed inside. Her 4 hours she had been raised to fight, to rule, to dominate. But now, all that had been taken, not by violence but by choice. He gave her the one thing her world never had: freedom. And that terrified her more than any sword ever had. A knock came at the chamber door. A soldier entered, dropping to one knee, his face pale. "My princess," he said, "Lord Revan has sent an envoy. He demands your return to his court." Valera's blood ran cold. Lord Revan, her father's old ally, and the man who had once tried to marry her by force. He had seen her fall in the arena, and now saw a chance to claim her through law, but not for love, for power. Ryan stepped forward calmly. "And what happens if she refuses?" he asked. The soldier hesitated, then answered, "He promises war." Valera clenched her jaw, his fists tight. The laws had made her a prize to be passed, and now she was being offered again like cattle. But this time, she wouldn't stay silent. "Lord Revan," Valera said coldly, "the Keltura's daughters are not for sale." The soldier bowed and left in haste, the door closing behind him like a warning bell. Her maids looked at her with wide eyes, some frightened, some inspired. Ryan didn't speak, he waited, letting her decide what came next. She looked at him sharply. "Will you protect us if they come?" Ryan nodded once. "Yes," he said, "but only if you want me to. No promises, no orders, no chains. Just a man offering his strength." Later that night, she found him again. Standing near the ruined training yard, rain fell lightly, and the flames of the torches hissed with steam. She stood beside him, her voice low. "My people still believe I'm yours," she said. "They think I've surrendered to you." Ryan looked at the rain falling through the light. "And have you?" he asked, not cruel, just honest. Valera didn't answer at first. "I surrendered the day I lost in the arena," she said, "but not to you. I surrendered to a system that made me property. You didn't conquer me," she whispered. "You gave me back my sword." Ryan turned to her, and for a moment, there was no war, no throne, no law, just two warriors standing in the dark. "I'll leave in 2 days," he said. "Take my people and go back to Earth. You don't owe me anything." Valera's heart clenched at his words. She thought she would feel relief, but instead, she felt cold. "Leave?" she asked, confused. He nodded. "There's nothing here for me." That lie hit harder than truth, because she knew. She was the reason he had stayed this long. The next morning, her oldest maid, Vina, approached her quietly. "You care for him," Vina said, "don't you?" Valera said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Vina smiled gently. Brushing dust from the princess's shoulder, "You are no longer conquered," she said, "but you have a choice. Letting him go or standing beside him." And that was when Valera understood this wasn't about law anymore. It was about power, the kind built on trust, not fear. She walked to the main gate of the fortress, where Ryan was checking his ship's loading crates. Soldiers saluted him. Maids watched from balconies, and nobles whispered in corners. Valera approached without guards, without crown, without armor. Just herself. "I've made my choice," she said. Ryan turned to her, raising a brow, and us. She stepped closer, eyes locked with his. "You didn't take me," she said, "so I give myself not as your property," she continued, "but as your partner, if you leave. I go with you." The words hung in the air like thunder. Ryan didn't speak, but in his eyes something shifted. The silent warrior had found something more powerful than any sword. He nodded once, and in that quiet motion, a new future was born. Not forced by law, but forged by choice. The storm came before dawn. Lightning cracked across the Keltaran sky, and rain hammered the glass roofs of the fortress. But inside the royal chamber, there was no fear. Only a quiet fire and heavy silence. Valera stood barefoot before the mirror, her ceremonial armor untouched, her crown lying in a box. Tonight was not a night for war. Tonight was for choice. Ryan sat alone in the old war library, a place no Keltaran male had dared enter for generations. Books surrounded him, texts in alien languages, journals of noble bloodlines, and scrolls filled with laws he could barely understand. He wasn't studying them to rule, he was studying them to break the parts that hurt people like her. Valera stepped into the room wearing a dark robe with her house sigil removed. The maids followed behind her, not as servants but as sisters. Each had cast off the colors of her house, choosing instead plain robes with no mark of ownership. Valera stood before Ryan, eyes firm but soft. "We've made our decision," she said. Ryan looked up slowly, setting down a scroll. "I didn't ask for one," he replied quietly. "You didn't have to," Valera said, her voice calm but strong. "You offered freedom," she continued. "Now we offer loyalty." She looked back at the 6 women behind her winch. One had once been a daughter of warlords and tyrants. Now they stepped forward as women of their own will. Yea, Vina, Mareth, Juna, Tishi, and near each, placed a small piece of jewelry on the table. These were the symbols of their old houses. And they left them behind. Valera spoke again. "In Keltran history, a concubine was forced to kneel, to serve. But we stand today not as property, but as warriors of peace, not because we were claimed, but because we chose." She stepped closer, the firelight dancing in. Her eyes, "We offer a pact not of submission, but of partnership. We follow you, not as slaves, but as women who have seen who you truly are." Ryan was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the storm outside. Then he stood, his hand resting gently on the table. "I don't want concubines," he said. "I want allies." Valera smiled, just a little. "Then call us that," she said. "Call us what you will." "As long as it's by choice," he looked at each of them, eyes meeting theirs one by one, and in every gaze, he saw the same thing, not fear, not duty, but a fierce will to walk beside him. No one spoke as Ryan reached into his coat and took out a single symbol, his old Earth military badge. He placed it beside their jewelry. "Then let this be our symbol," he said. "Not of ownership, but of unity." As they turned to leave, Valera stayed behind, her voice low. "I never imagined I would say this to a man," she said, "especially not a human, but you've given us more than safety. You've given us the power to choose who we are, and She paused. "I choose you." Ryan's eyes didn't widen, but his breath caught, just once. Not because of what she said, but because of how freely she gave it, later that night. In the quiet hall of the garden temple, a private ritual began. There were no priests, no nobles, no crowds, only 7 women and 1 human. They stood in a circle, hands joined, flames flickering around them. Valera spoke the old words but changed them. Not vows of submission, but promises of protection, of choice, of shared strength. Each woman repeated after her, not out of obedience, but out of unity. And when the final word was spoken, they turned to Ryan not as a master, but as a man who had earned their respect. Outside, lightning faded, and the storm began to calm. The sky still rumbled. The first stars peeked through the clouds. It felt like something had shifted, not just in the palace, but in the whole empire, because for the first time in history, a human had not taken by force. He had built something with trust, and the concubines who had once been bound by law were now bound by something far stronger. The sun rose behind dark clouds, casting a deep red hue across the city of Keltera. Drums beat in the distance, slow and heavy, echoing like the footsteps of giants. It was the sound of war returning. The arena of blood and honor, once the symbol of Valera's rule. The place of her greatest defeat stood open again, but this time she would not be watching from a throne. She would be standing in the sand. The challenge had come from Lord Vazan, one of the last warlords still loyal to the old ways. He had mocked her from his floating palace, calling her a human's pet and a fallen flower. And then, in front of his entire court, he threw down the sacred glove, declaring an arena challenge. "If the human does not fight," he said, "then let the so-called concubine die in his place." The law was ancient. If a former noble refused a challenge, her house would be stripped of its lands. Valera had no choice, but this time she didn't face it alone. Ryan stood beside her in the arena gates, adjusting the straps on his armor. It was Kelteran make lightweight, black and silver, shaped to move with speed. He wore no helmet, only the mark of earth on his shoulder. "You don't have to fight," Valera said quietly, her voice like steel hidden beneath silk. Ryan looked at her with calm eyes. "Yes, I do," he replied. "Not for law," he continued, "not even for pride, but because I won't let anyone turn you into a symbol of shame." The gates creaked open, and the crowd let out a deafening roar. Nobles, soldiers, and merchants filled the seats. Every eye watched as the human and the princess stepped onto the blood-soaked sand. Across from them stood Lord Vezin's chosen. Warriors, 3 armored giants, bred for war and trained since birth. One carried a hammer that cracked the ground with every step, another held twin blades that shimmered with poison. And the last had claws like black iron. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to humiliate. Valera held her weapon, Titan electrostaff carved from her family's forge. Ryan raised his sword slowly, not in challenge but in warning. There would be no mercy. The horn sounded, chaos erupted. The twin-blade warrior came for Valera first, spinning fast and low. She countered with a sharp strike, deflecting the blades and driving her staff into the warrior's gut, but poison cut across her arm. And she staggered back before the second blade could strike again. A blur of movement flashed past her. Ryan's sword tore through the air, slicing one blade, clean in half, then the other. The warrior collapsed without a scream. The hammer wielder roared and charged Ryan, swinging with crushing force, but Ryan ducked, rolled, and cut behind the giant's knee. The hammer dropped as the warrior fell face first, unable to stand only. One enemy remained, the clawed one, and this one didn't rush. He moved slowly, circling, eyes locked on Valera. Ryan turned to protect her, but she held out a hand, stopping him. "This one is mine," she said, voice firm. She moved forward, pain in her arm, blood on her sleeve, but her grip was steady. The clawed warrior lunged, slashing at her chest. She dodged left, staff spinning, cracking against his ribs. Another slash. Then another, until he pinned her to the arena wall, claws at her throat. But instead of fear, Valera smiled. "I was a princess long before I was ever anyone's prize," she whispered, and then, with a scream of fury, she drove her staff. Upward electricity surged, and the warrior spasmed. Falling to his knees, her final blow knocked him unconscious. Silence filled the arena, then slowly applause, and then cheers, real cheers. Not for blood, but for unity, for something new. Valera turned to Ryan, her breath heavy, her arm bleeding. He walked toward her and knelt, not because she was royalty, but because he respected her strength. She didn't stop him. Instead, she knelt beside him, 2 warriors, side by side. The announcer declared their victory, but it didn't matter, because the people had already decided something greater. They were no longer conqueror and conquered. They were partners. And the arena that once enslaved her now echoed with chants of her name, not as a fallen princess, but as a warrior reborn. Keltera had never seen a morning so quiet. No war drums, no royal horns. Just the soft sound of wind brushing through the palace banners. The arena gates were still stained with dried blood. But the people weren't looking at the sand anymore. They were looking at the sky, because something impossible was happening above them. An Earth Alliance ship, a real one, was descending slowly into the capital. And riding with it, standing at the open ramp, were 2 figures the entire empire now knew by name, Princess Valera of Keltera and Commander Ryan of Earth. The ship landed in the great courtyard, where nobles and soldiers gathered with restless eyes. Some bowed out of fear, others out of newfound respect. But one man, Emperor Shavar, stood tall at the center, dressed in ceremonial gold. He had ruled for decades without challenge, his words shaping the lives of billions. But today, his eyes betrayed uncertainty. He had called for Ryan and Valera personally. He had expected obedience, submission, fear, but what he got was change. Valera stepped forward first. Wearing armor of both Earth and Kelteran design, it shimmered with silver plates and midnight blue cloth. No crown sat on her head, but her presence was more royal than ever. Ryan walked beside her, not as her master, but as her equal. Their hands brushed once as they walked, a quiet reminder of the bond between them, a bond no law could undo. "You were bound to the law of conquest," the Emperor began, his voice deep and sharp, "yet you defy it." Valera looked him in the eye, her voice calm but clear. "No," she said, "we honor it, but we have reshaped it." The law once turned victors into tyrants, and the defeated into tools, she continued, but we have shown a better path. Choice. The emperor narrowed his gaze. And what does a concubine know of law? He asked coldly. Valera didn't flinch. She reached behind her, drawing out a scroll ancient. Cracked and full of faded ink, the first code, she said, older than conquest, older than thrones. The law once stated that unity between houses could be made through chosen alliance, not forced bonding. He simply returned to that truth. The nobles murmured in shock. Few had read the old codes. Fewer still had believed in them, but Ryan stepped forward now, voice firm. This isn't just about Keltera, he said. This is about all the worlds in your empire. How many daughters have been stolen? How many warriors forced to kneel? How many victories were just masks for cruelty? Silence followed, and not even the emperor could deny the truth behind those words. Valera raised her voice so all could hear. I was a concubine by law, she said, but now I speak as a free woman, standing beside the man who gave me that. Freedom, I ask you not to destroy the law, she said, but to rewrite it, to make space for consent, for choice, for honor without chains. The emperor looked at her for a long time. And then, in front of the galaxy, he stepped down from his dais. He handed her the royal seal not out of defeat, but acknowledgement. Let the new law be written. He said, let it begin with you. Later that week, the entire empire watched through holograms as a new treaty was signed. The Pact of Equals, it was called. It allowed noble houses to form bonds not through combat alone, but through mutual respect and choice. It erased the automatic ownership of conquered houses, and most shocking of all, it allowed non-nobles like humans to be recognized as political equals in the empire. Valera became more than a princess. She became a symbol, and Ryan, though offered titles and power, chose instead to lead as an advisor. He refused the throne but stayed beside her always, not to command but to protect, to teach, and to walk beside her as the galaxy changed. Her maids, once silent daughters of defeated houses, became leaders in the new court. Each had a voice, a vote, and a place of power.
Ow.
Their story spread like wildfire across the stars. People no longer whispered concubine as an insult. Now, it was a symbol of survival, of transformation, a reminder that even the deepest chains could be broken if one person dared to treat another with kindness instead of conquest. And in the center of it all, the story remained the same. One human walked into an alien world, killed a monster, and instead of claiming a prize, he gave away power, and in return, he earned something no blade could ever win. Loyalty, love, and a legacy that would outlive them both.